I never thought that a simple visit to my dad's old friend would stir up so many feelings inside me. I mean, David had always been this larger-than-life figure growing up. He was the kind of guy who radiated confidence effortlessly, always cracking jokes with this deep, hearty laugh that just filled the room. I remember hanging around him when I was younger, maybe too much. I was 18 the last time I saw him, and back then, I didn't fully understand why I was always drawn to him. But now, things were different. I was different. At 22, I've come to accept who I am, embrace it even. I'm gay, and it feels good to finally say that without hesitation. But it also means that seeing people from my past, people I had weird, complicated feelings about, hits a lot harder. And David? Well, let's just say he's more than just some old friend now. I hadn't seen him in 4 years, and when my dad, John, mentioned that we were stopping by David's house today, I jumped at the opportunity. Yeah, maybe a little too enthusiastically. David always had this effortless, rugged kind of charm that I didn't really understand back then. But now, oh, I get it. His dark hair always looked perfectly messy, his sharp jawline, the way he carried himself with that easy confidence. It all made sense to me now. And I couldn't deny it anymore. David was handsome as hell. The thought of seeing him again, this time as someone who finally understood his own feelings, was a mix of excitement and nervous energy. The idea of going to David's house was oddly exciting. Maybe it was the familiarity, or maybe it was the fact that I could finally see him in a new light, through the eyes of someone who knew they liked men. Either way, the moment my dad mentioned it, I was already halfway out the door, pretending it was just a casual trip. But inside, I knew it was more than that. This was a chance to see him again. The man I had always admired, just in a different way now. The drive to David's house felt like it took forever, even though it was only about 30 minutes away. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, my mind racing. I hadn't seen David since I was 18, but I still remembered every little detail about him. His voice, his smile, the way he used to ruffle my hair whenever he and my dad would hang out. Back then, I had no idea why I liked being around him so much, but now it was crystal clear. Seeing him again, knowing that I was openly gay now, made my stomach twist in knots. Part of me felt like I was stepping into dangerous territory, but another part of me was excited, like I was about to revisit an old crush I never knew I had. We'd pulled up to David's house, which was just as I remembered it. A cozy 2-story place tucked away in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It had this laid-back, welcoming vibe, just like David himself. The front yard was well kept, with a couple of garden chairs on the porch, and the windows were wide open, letting in the autumn breeze. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint scent of a barbecue from somewhere down the street. Everything about it felt comforting, familiar, but at the same time, it sent a jolt of anticipation through me. I couldn't wait to see him again, to feel that rush of excitement when we finally stood face to face after all these years. My dad, John, parked the car and started rummaging around in the backseat, muttering something about needing to fix a loose wire or cable before heading in. I wasn't really paying attention though. My eyes were glued to the house, and before I even realized it, I was already halfway out of the car, eager to get inside. "I'll be there in a minute," my dad said, his voice distant as he bent over the car engine. "Go ahead and say hi to David." It was exactly what I wanted to hear. I nodded, not even waiting for him to look up. I made my way up the stone path to the front door, feeling this bubbling excitement in my chest. I wasn't planning on knocking. I wanted to surprise him, catch him off guard, just like old times. It felt like a small, playful thing to do, something a bit mischievous, something David would get a kick out of. Besides, my dad and David were close enough that we practically had free reign of each other's homes. It wasn't weird, right? It's not like I was breaking any rules. I twisted the doorknob and stepped inside. The house was warm, cozy, and exactly how I remembered it, though a bit quieter than usual. The familiar scent of wood polish and faint cologne lingered in the air, the kind that instantly brought back memories of sitting in the living room, listening to my dad and David banter back and forth over beers and football games. But today, the house was silent. No TV blaring in the background, no clattering from the kitchen, just the faint sound of water running somewhere upstairs. I smiled to myself, guessing David was probably getting ready for the day. I decided not to call out his name, wanting to keep the surprise intact. The idea of catching him off guard was thrilling for some reason, probably more than it should have been. I could feel my heart beating a little faster as I walked quietly through the hallway, my shoes making soft thuds on the wooden floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my curiosity getting the better of me. As I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed the sound of running water had stopped. I figured he was probably just finishing up in the shower, and that's when I made my way toward the bedroom at the far end of the hallway. But as I approached the door, something caught my eye. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, steam still billowing out from inside, and before I could even think about turning away, I saw him. David was standing there, dripping wet, just stepping out of the shower with nothing but a white towel loosely wrapped around his waist. His skin glistened, water droplets catching the soft light from the bathroom, highlighting every curve of muscle on his toned, athletic body. His chest was broad, with a light dusting of hair, and his arms looked strong, defined, more muscular than I remembered. His dark hair was damp, sticking to his forehead, and as he raised his hand to push it back, I couldn't help but stare. He looked incredible. So different from the last time I saw him, more mature, more rugged. He was no longer just my dad's friend. He was a man, and standing there, half naked, he looked like someone out of a dream. My mouth went dry, and for a few seconds, I just stood there, frozen, unable to move. I knew I should have looked away, but I couldn't. My eyes were glued to him, taking in every inch of his body, every detail. I didn't know what I was expecting when I came up here, but it definitely wasn't this. Jeremy? His deep voice snapped me out of my daze, and I quickly realized that I had been caught staring. My face flushed hot with embarrassment, and I tore my eyes away from his body, fumbling for words. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." I blurted out, my heart racing. "I didn't mean to, I didn't know." David just chuckled, his voice low and amused, and to my surprise, he didn't seem the least bit bothered. If anything, he looked slightly amused by my reaction, his lips quirking up into a playful smile. "It's fine," he said, casually tightening the towel around his waist. Guess I wasn't expecting company so soon. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, and I could feel them travel over me, like he was sizing me up in a way I hadn't noticed before. My stomach flipped, but I quickly brushed it off, shaking my head. "Really, I'm sorry, I was just, Dad's still outside, fixing the car or something. He told me to come in, I didn't mean to." I trailed off, feeling like I was making it worse with every word. "No harm done, kid," David replied with a grin, his tone still light and teasing. "It's good to see you again. You've grown up a lot since the last time I saw you." His eyes flicked down to my body for just a second before he turned back toward the bathroom. I could still feel my heart pounding in my chest as I quickly excused myself and made my way back downstairs, replaying the scene over and over in my head. The way his eyes had looked at me, the way he smiled. It felt like there was something more behind it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. By the time my dad finally made it inside, he was on the phone, grumbling about work. Apparently, there was some kind of emergency, and despite being on vacation, his boss was calling him in. I could hear the frustration in his voice as he apologized to David for cutting the visit short, but David just waved it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. I, on the other hand, was quietly relieved. As soon as my dad left, I found myself alone with David. The house suddenly felt quieter, more intimate, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something unexpected was about to happen. With my dad gone, the atmosphere in David's house shifted. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavier, more intimate. I felt the weight of being alone with him settle over me in a way I hadn't anticipated. I tried to shake off the nerves by cracking open a beer, offering one to David, who was now dressed in casual clothes, just a simple pair of jeans and a plain, tight-fitting shirt that still hinted at the muscular frame beneath. My mind kept flashing back to the sight of him wrapped in that towel, wet from the shower, and I knew I had to focus on something else before I drove myself crazy. We settled into the living room, sinking into the soft, worn couch that faced the TV. David turned on some background noise, a random game show I wasn't paying attention to, and we started drinking. The beer was cold, refreshing, and it took the edge off the weird tension I felt creeping in. The first couple of sips made it easier to relax, and before long, we were both stretched out on the couch, legs up, leaning back, and just talking like old times. Only, it wasn't really like old times. There was something different now, something unspoken hanging between us. We talked about life. I told him about college, about work, and how things had been going for me in general. He listened, nodding thoughtfully, and then he started sharing bits of his own life over the past few years. It was strange, hearing him talk so openly about things, his job, his travels, the relationships that didn't work out. He was still the same David I remembered, but there was a vulnerability in the way he spoke that I hadn't seen before. Maybe it was the beers, maybe it was the years that had passed, or maybe it was just being alone, but something about the conversation felt more real, more personal than ever. At one point, the conversation turned to relationships. I knew it was inevitable. He joked about how I must have a fiancé by now, or at least be dating someone, and I could feel my heart rate spike a little. I hesitated, took a long swig of my beer, and then decided to be honest. There was no reason to hide it anymore, so I told him. I told him I was gay. The words left my mouth and hung in the air for a moment, and I braced myself for his reaction, not sure what to expect. But instead of surprise or judgment, there was this strange sense of understanding in his eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't make it weird. If anything, he seemed almost relieved. Then, in a quiet, matter-of-fact way, he told me that he had come to the same realization about himself over the past few years. That admission hung between us like a secret we were finally free to share. It felt liberating, like this huge weight had been lifted off my chest, and suddenly, everything made sense, the way he'd looked at me earlier, the way the conversation had taken on this new level of intimacy. I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement at his words. The fact that David, the man I had always admired, had even secretly fantasized about, was not only gay, but had also noticed me in a way I never would have expected, made my head spin. The way he casually mentioned it, like it was no big deal, yet his eyes told a different story. His gaze lingered on me, and for the first time, I could feel a shift in the way he looked at me, not as some kid who used to hang around him and my dad, but as a man, someone he found attractive. The compliment came soon after, slipping out in a way that felt both casual and intentional. He told me I was handsome. Hearing those words from him was like a spark to a fire I didn't even realize was there. My pulse quickened, and suddenly, the space between us on the couch felt too wide. I could feel the energy between us change, becoming something thicker, more charged. It was subtle at first, just a lingering glance, a slight brush of the arm as he reached for his beer. But it was there, undeniable, and I knew he felt it too. As the conversation continued, I became bolder. Maybe it was the beer loosening my inhibitions, or maybe it was the fact that we were both finally being honest with ourselves, but I found myself leaning closer to him, my hand resting casually on his knee. At first, it was innocent enough, just a friendly gesture, the kind that could be easily explained away if needed. But when I didn't move it, and he didn't either, something shifted. The tension between us built slowly, but steadily, like an electric current running through the air. I could feel the warmth of his body next to mine, and the more we talked, the more my hand seemed to gravitate toward him. There was no sudden moment of realization. It was more like a slow, inevitable progression, as though both of us knew where this was heading, but neither wanted to be the first to make the move. My hand inched upward, sliding from his knee to his thigh, resting there for a moment as I felt the muscle tense slightly beneath my fingers. My heart was racing, pounding in my chest as I tested the waters, my gaze flicking up to his face to see how he would react. But David didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned in slightly, his breath coming a little slower, his eyes darkening with something I hadn't seen before. The next few seconds were a blur. My hand continued to slide up, moving almost on its own, until it reached the waistband of his jeans. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the warmth of his skin beneath the fabric. My fingers hesitated for a brief moment, but then, as if something inside me snapped, I slipped my hand inside. Everything after that became a blur of sensation. The way his body responded to my touch, the way the air seemed to thicken with desire, the way my heart pounded in my ears, it all felt surreal. There was no going back now. David didn't push me away. In fact, he leaned into it, his breath hitching slightly as I explored further. It felt electric, the heat between us growing with every second. I could feel my own pulse quickening, the adrenaline coursing through me as I pressed my hand deeper, feeling the outline of him hardening under my touch. The tension between us had transformed into something physical, something primal. Neither of us spoke, and we didn't need to. The silence between us was heavy, loaded with meaning, with all the things we weren't saying but both clearly understood. He shifted slightly on the couch, his body responding to my movements, and before I knew it, his hand was on mine, guiding me, urging me to go further. The sensation of his hand over mine, his skin hot and rough, sent a shiver through me. I couldn't believe this was happening, that after all these years of seeing David as just my dad's friend, we had somehow crossed into this territory. But it felt right, like something we had both been waiting for without even realizing it. I leaned closer to him, the space between us disappearing entirely as our bodies pressed together. I could smell the faint hint of his cologne mixed with the natural scent of his skin, still slightly damp from the shower. His chest was rising and falling faster now, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts as I continued exploring him. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the heat of our combined desire, and it was as if nothing else in the world existed outside of that moment. At some point, I don't even remember when, we both moved without thinking. 1 second, I was touching him through his jeans, and the next, we were fumbling, desperate, our hands pulling at clothing, peeling off layers. His shirt was off first, tossed carelessly onto the floor, revealing the broad expanse of his chest, muscular and defined in a way that sent another wave of heat rushing through me. My fingers traced the lines of his body, feeling every ridge, every curve of muscle, and I couldn't get enough. My own shirt was gone soon after, and the feeling of his bare skin against mine was overwhelming. His hands were on me now, rough and insistent, exploring my chest, my back, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I could feel every part of him, his body pressed tightly against mine, the hardness of his arousal against my thigh, the heat radiating off him. It was intense, raw, unlike anything I had ever felt before. Somehow, in the haze of it all, we made our way to the bedroom, stumbling and laughing softly as we tore at the rest of our clothes. I wasn't sure who was leading who anymore. It was all a blur of hands, mouths, and skin, and by the time we fell onto the bed, there was no turning back. The weight of him on top of me, his body pressing me into the mattress, was intoxicating. I could feel his need, his desire, and it matched my own. The way he touched me was both rough and tender at the same time, as if he had been holding back for years and was finally letting it all out. There was no awkwardness between us now, no hesitation. Everything felt natural, like this was exactly what we were meant to be doing. His hands were everywhere, on my chest, sliding down my stomach, pulling at my hips as he positioned himself between my legs. I could feel the heat of his breath on my neck, his lips brushing against my skin as he kissed his way down my body, leaving a trail of fire in his wake. And then it happened. The moment we crossed that final line, when there was no more thinking, just pure physical connection. It wasn't slow, it wasn't gentle, it was desperate, hungry, like we had both been waiting for this for far too long. The sensation of him inside me was overwhelming, a mix of pleasure and pain that sent my mind spiraling. I gasped, my body arching up to meet his, and he groaned in response, his hands gripping my hips tightly as he thrust deeper. The bed creaked beneath us, the room filled with the sounds of our bodies moving together, the soft gasps and moans that escaped our lips as we lost ourselves in each other. Every movement felt like it sent shockwaves through my body, every touch igniting something deep inside me that I hadn't known was there. It was intense, raw, and unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I felt connected to him in a way that went beyond just the physical. It was like our bodies were speaking a language all their own, one that didn't need words. For a few moments, neither of us moved. We just lay there, tangled together, our bodies slick with sweat, our breathing heavy and uneven. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and I could feel his racing too, the rise and fall of his chest pressed against mine. There was a strange sense of calm that settled over us, a quiet after the storm. It was almost surreal, lying there with him, our bodies still intertwined, knowing that we had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Eventually, David rolled off me, collapsing onto the bed beside me with a satisfied sigh. I turned my head to look at him, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was exhilarated, still riding the high of what had just happened, while another part of me was already starting to process the gravity of it all. What did this mean for us? For my dad? for the years of friendship that had just been turned upside down in a single night. But as I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the warmth of David's body next to mine, I couldn't bring myself to worry about any of that. Not yet, anyway. For now, all I could think about was how right it had felt, how intense and alive I had felt in that moment with him. Whatever happened next, we'd figure it out. But for now, I was content to just be here, in this moment with him. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of something much bigger.